start off, I have the pleasure of introducing everyone, and so I have my computer up here just because I wrote some notes so that I didn't forget. I'm sorry about the awkward pulling it here. First right here, sitting directly in front of me is Dr. Susan Crow. She is a professor of soil ecology and biogeochemistry here in the NREM department. She also leads the soil health lab here, and she is one of the PIs for the Hawaiʻi Climate-Smart Commodities grant, which we are going to be learning about today. The next person that I would like to introduce is also right here, sitting off to my right, is Lala. She is the Equity and Indigenous Innovation Lead for the grant, and her team is tasked with moving the project from their current Pewa Framework, which they will touch over into their next implementation phase. She's part of the Conscious Concepts organization that does education and training on equity assessment, community engagement, place-based community development, among other things. And then the last person that unfortunately could not make it here today, they got a little sick last minute, but they will be with us via Zoom, which is Kamu. I apologize, I don't want to butcher the name. Kamuela.
Yeah, I'm here. You can hear me. I'm the guy in the car. So thank you everybody for your patience and your willingness to be flexible.
At the University of Hawaii system, and their mission is to explore and create a system of support and growth for ancestral science and technology with the goal to normalize indigenous systems as a means of resilience and abundance here in Hawaii. So thank you for joining us. We have a lay for you that will be placed on the computer.
Made these beautiful collays. Lyndon, just for you.
So sweet.
And it matches your. Sorry, you're not here, Kamu. We have one for you as well. Mahalo for being here. Aloha, and yeah, thank you for letting us kind of take over the seminar series for the next few sessions. Melissa's good sport. We're really excited to share this time with you guys. We're starting to enter into a phase of inquiry and really exploration for what it means to be climate smart here in Hawaii. And so today we have kind of our foundation setting. We've called Firm Foundation. Kahua Paʻa is this sort of series and really sharing with you how to go from vision to implementation of that dream. So we start by laying the groundwork for that and then enter into a series of a few seminars where we've invited folks to share sort of the data and the community and relationship side together to really start to think about what it means for the future of agriculture in Hawaii in the context of climate smart. So yeah, thanks. Okay, so this is us. Thank you. We've already gotten introduction. I will go past the Kamu online and then Lala and really talking through kind of this laying the cornerstones of our foundation. And a couple of weeks ago, we had Dr. Chip Fletcher come in and really talk about planetary peril, is what the top says. And he talked us through his recent paper about Earth at Risk. And really, he told us that this paper was a call for culture change, a shift away from wealth, privilege, and profit to resiliency and sustainability as a legitimate basis for economic exchange. And this paper really resonated, and we invited him to come kind of launch this series for us because it just hits on so many of the common themes that we're touching on in our project: climate change, heat, food and water, biodiversity loss, social inequity, and sustainability transition. And that this paper has received such profound attention all around the world, and it really came from a place grounded in Hawaii was amazing. And so this figure was the one that really spoke to me at the time, centering human values back as the crux, as the nexus for these conversations. And the paper ends, hopefully you read it, there is no guarantee of a just, nourishing, and healthy future for humanity. And hope will not catalyze the change we need. That work falls upon us. And so that I've really taken to heart. And so planetary peril, but across the top, that would say localized context and solutions, right? So here in Hawaii, we know that there is a history of dispossession and colonial extraction, as has happened globally, and Chip talked about, leading to Hawaii in its current state, in the context of agriculture and productive, resilient landscapes. We are at a crossroads. There have been underinvesting institutions that have left producers and practitioners unable to access existing programs. Long-term data sets are absent. And as a result, the development of decision support systems that might otherwise help people access support and funding and information do not exist here in Hawaii. And also we have international reliance on flawed climate assessment frameworks that are based on economic extractive exchange premises. And so these are the three areas that we are choosing to undertake the work on in our partnership. So these are kind of our big picture, why we're here. We responded to the opportunity through this USDA Climate Smart Commodities call as a proposition for an equitable just assessment framework for an abundant agricultural future in Hawaii. And along those lines, the themes of decarbonization, transformed food systems, and climate resilience emerge for us. And so we were awarded $40 million in this partnership. And so right from the beginning, we had this core award team. It is truly a partnership of folks from all around the state. Sure, sorry about that. From all around the state, we have a producer engagement team of local community-based organizations, many partners, as well as 50+ producers and practitioners who are with us right from the start. And we formed recently a producer and practitioner council. So truly bringing together a partnership of folks who are not usually at the table together so that we can have conversations together instead of any contention. Contention is good as long as it's constructive, and that's everybody's there for it. So the essentials of the project is that right from the beginning, we have almost 7,000 acres of implementation. So this is literally just getting conservation practices in the ground with our producers and practitioners across forest, ranching, and farming. 52 producers, and now we're entering into a phase 2 where we can truly put in the work to identify, fund, and implement place-based and indigenous land stewardship approaches, really prioritizing truly underserved producers. And so we are distributing millions of dollars of funds across the counties, food and forests, and we're also provisioning producers and practitioners, including technical and financial support data, increased agency, and access to markets. In a nutshell. Whew. Okay, but where at the heart of this is our North Star, and that is this vision of reperpetuating health, equity, resilience, and abundance in Hawaii's landscapes and communities. And so how are we getting there? Back to the USDA requirements, build infrastructure for inclusive decision support, implement those practices, strengthen relationships and technical assistance through that network, identify and overcome barriers. We're tackling the barriers issue head on, and then generating increased momentum and access for a market-based sustainable food system. Okay, we've got lots of metrics and outputs, but I want to focus on what we really want to see as outcomes by the end: improved system resilience, equity, transform food systems, decarbonization and an inclusion of working lands and agriculture, local food production, food security, and number 5, normalization of indigenous and place-based food systems as legitimate climate smart practice. how on earth are we doing this? It is easy to say you want an inclusive partnership where everyone's voices are heard, including our producer and practitioners. We thought a lot about how to implement sociocracy as a distributed power of decision-making structure that comes with everything from how do you build decision-making teams, how do you communicate for transparency and record so that it's open and viable. It's how you operationalize these things that we say we want to do. This is how we did it. And so in our partnership, if these are literally groups of people, we have all these teams interconnected, communicating, talking in the room, online, in the field. There's a lot, it's complicated, but whew, we're doing it. And we have at our center some of the art and artistry behind it represents some of our key areas where we come together as the partnership, but work in areas of equity and indigenous innovation, producer support, producer impact, which is our science and inquiry, and then stewardship was really making sure that this lasts beyond the end of our funding period. And so our goal is to go from this like off the shelf USDA approved list of practices that you guys have heard of. I know because I've talked to you about it myself in many cases. These are the things that go into the ground, but how do we actually transform and have that transformative change? And we're doing it on a circuitous route from our producers, practitioners, policymakers, and decision support, centered on this idea of a multi-dimensional equitable climate assessment framework that we're calling the Climate-Smart multi-metric. And this is what we've invited folks over the next 4 or 5 sessions to come and talk about these different dimensions in different ways, focused on policy, trying to get this implemented for the long haul within good policy, locally and internationally. And so those dimensions are here, warming mitigation, and then the rest is more holistic: soil health, functional ecology and nutrition, circular economy, economic and community well-being, and indigenous well-being and genealogy as very specifically called out dimensions that we want to make sure we hit. And so where do we start? We start by acknowledging that these fractures are here and that we are here together to do the work. And I pass now to Kamu online to talk to us about how we do this.
Mahalo. You guys can hear me?
Change the.
Hold on,
Hold on, Kamu.
Okay. I used to work on a farm, so I can use my outside voice if no can.
We're gonna get you tech support to
Okay.
get your volume up.
This is coming.
Okay,
Once.
awesome. I can use my outside voice pretty well. Let me know when it's good because I want to ready and I'll start.
This one? No.
Take my check. I can do my check.
Good.
Are we good?
Yeah, almost too loud. We can fix that here. right?
Sorry, Kamu, just a second.
Mhm.
Okay, my check. Bo knows this, yo. Bo knows that, yo. Bo knows that, yo. Bo can't rap, so what do you know? Am I good? Okay, I did my check in it. I went to him.
Okay, all right, Kamu, it's all you.
So
And
thank
just-
you for letting me do this. I was gonna try to be there. I don't want to be a vector of whatever my daughter may have handed up. But I also didn't want to be sitting in traffic with a little bit of what I feel like some stomach bug. So I really appreciate you letting me take this from the car. So I'm going to try to think what is really important. Then just the background, like my name's Kamuela, Enos. I'm the director of the Office of Indigenous Knowledge and Innovation. Proud UH alum from LCC to UH Manoa Hawaiian Studies to Master in Urban and Regional Planning, and then worked for many years in community, like was one of the directors at Mountain Farms. And the reason why I bring that up is like I moved over to the university 5 years ago, specifically to be at the table in projects like this. My mentor told me if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So I want to make sure that Indigenous communities are not on the menu. The Office of Indigenous Knowledge Innovation is situated within the Office of the Vice President for Research Innovation, and it's a systems office. UH is the only R1 university in the nation that has the Office of Indigenous Knowledge Innovation embedded within its research arm. So I help to guide the non-performative engagement of Indigenous knowledge and research. The general premise of our office is ancestral practices. Our sciences and technologies have thousands of years of R&D, and our sciences and technologies are distinct in that they optimize not for extraction and ownership, but they optimize for regenerative systems. Our ancestral sciences weren't taught at universities and services of corporations. They're taught by families and services of ecosystems. And these sciences have allowed Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islands to be self-sufficient on islands for millennia. So I bring that to contemporary space. If ancestral practices and sciences and technologies, then we have to understand our communities as ecosystems of innovation, and that we see our communities as experts. That's a really key kind of entry point of why I'm here. I worked with Dr. Crow from the beginning of moving over in the office, and some work we're looking at the integration of indigenous sciences and soil health and using contemporary technologies. And I've been working with my peer Lala and Nuss for a long time. So I'm really happy to be represented. Next slide. I think just to kind of talk about what our function is. We can go to the next slide. Yeah. It basically starts beginning to kind of highlight in this climate smart commodity conversation. When Dr. Crow approached me, my thinking was, it's not necessarily that climate smart commodities is indigenous. For the ancestral practices are climate smart commodities, as much as like, if this is the nomenclature being used by the federal government to rethink about how it normalizes use language to provide structural support for sustainable food production, can this be a space for indigenous communities to be at the table, right? And the biggest thing I always evoke in my work is like, there's the Pewa and these other things, but the real contemporary image I like a lot is the I don't know emoji. It's like, we're not saying that it absolutely is, like, we're not saying it's not, but how do we hold space to figure it out? So the premise that I wanted to share is like, like from a research we've done, we understand that ancestral practices optimize for regenerative food systems. It was the basis of our pre-contact economy. We didn't have money that we didn't turn abstract wealth into coins. Like, our ancestors treated our economy as their ecology, and therefore the entire society was optimized for how is each valley able to sustainably grow its own food, to treat food not as an export that you would trade for other people. Like, you wouldn't sell kalo to another valley to get money. You would actually treat your banks of fish and your banks of kalo as an endowment, where you understood what was the principle and you hand that principle off to the next generation. You only took the interest. And we clearly understood the land's carrying capacity to generate food, as well as like what was the size of the community that could live sustainably within it. It's a way of saying our entire society was based off of this principle. Next slide. The reality of what happened then is that when that was severed, it really severed both our ecological and social institutions of abundance creation, of wealth and health and wellness. It kind of relegated our lands to the space where they are now, of like degradation, like ecological degradation, because land is no longer understood as, practices are no longer understood as what is in service of the health of the ecosystem. We're now participating in a global economy where practice of land are piecemeal. It's like, how are you creating widgets or services that could participate in global economy without thoughtfulness of how it impacts your local ecologies? And also, our communities went from being experts of place to being relegated to systems of poverty. And over time, these systems have been normalized. So that's what just Hawaiians are poor and the landscape is bust up. And that's just how things are. We're kind of trying to say, actually, it's not. But we don't want to just stop at the critique. So the next slide is how we're trying to show up. And this is a general approach that we have that is cross-cuts all the projects we're working in. And it's based off of some of the things I learned when we worked at Ma'o Farms, when we actually worked with researchers, and the researchers were able to not study us to extract our knowledge or try to save us, but actually use the power of research to show, for example, I worked on Ma'o Farms, an organic farm in Waianae at St. Kitts College. We worked with a native Hawaiian researcher that studied the gut microbiome of our students and found that they were 60% less likely to develop type 2 diabetes. And we saw the power of research to affirm a community intervention. And that when we received the research, we're able to use the research actually to fundraise. We're able to use the research to advocate for on our behalf in policy. But the most or sacred thing about that research, we use it to teach our students how their gut microbiome works and how when they are in relationship with ancestral practices done in a contemporary way. Because you do hula kahiko, you get hula awana. Like your practices don't have to look exactly like your ancestor, but the footwork and the intention have to be in alignment. When you grow food in relationship with landscape, you and the land will get healthy. So next slide. So actually we just kind of position it, sorry, stay on this slide really quickly. This idea, if we go back really quick to the last slide, I want to just point out the ethic. But researchers are allies and communities are experts. And that we really seek to holistically integrate this ancestral practices, like met Hawaiian, been in boardrooms, all kinds of stuff. And I'm no longer happy that we can actually open the place with a chant and then they kick us out when they make budgetary decisions. That's like done. Like how are we at the table in decision making? And we talk about equity from our perspective. We're not talking about equity of inclusion. We're talking about equity of ownership of business. Are we owning a controlling share of these initiatives, but still partnering with others that they also get benefits too? Like we get benefits to researchers because they have novel research and novel funding opportunities. But concurrently, the community is using the research to scale their practices to make sure they're viable. Next slide. I give an example of it in a project that we had when I was a researcher. I was previous to moving to the university, I was an adjunct lecturer in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning. I taught community-based planning, and a peer of mine has a lo'i kalo in the middle of Pro Shopping Center at Anthony DeLuz. And we ran 3 semesters of graduate students through this practice of asking the question, what kind of billable services a lo'i, what can a lo'i kalo that's situated in an urban community start billing people for? And we worked closely with the practitioner and graduate students. We taught the students the ethics of how to enter into the community, that you're not there to save the person, that you have to understand your positionality working with community. You have to take the time to embody the type of labor that they have to go through to be in the hot sun. So you're not just sounding stupid by spouting your mouth off on just all and sundry, where you have a chance to be embodied the discipline of their work. But then you have a chance to think about your own actualization. Like how is your being out in the field helping you understand your role and your function and your gift that you want to actualize as a student. And this document which came out was another reason why I left the community to go to university, because I saw potential, was that, man, when we aggregated all the things that Lo'i Kalo was doing, you're starting to look at like 6 figures worth of service, right? And this final product didn't just go to the practitioner, it went to the landowner, which is Kamuela Schools. It was a catalyst for us to talk about the INR organization, like, hey, these are the services you're providing. How do you want to think about structuring your organization so that it can capture these resources? And it would require like incorporating as a nonprofit. We require thinking about like hiring different people. And we require what I think is a professionalization of practice, which I think is always a struggle, but is part of the adaptation so that we can be relevant and create living wage jobs out of our identity. But it was also to the landowners, like this, you cannot have the community carry all the risk. They're providing all of these services. What type of structural changes do you make to support them? Because like pre-contact society wasn't funded by philanthropy. If you would have asked the Maka'inana, the people in the place to write a 3-year grant to the chief, they would have got that chief killed. Like that's a very undignified way for us to exist. Like it's positioning us as the beneficiaries of like the wealth we hold versus what we understood. Like we are the wealth creators of your community. We provide ecologic and economic and spiritual stability for the land. How are the practitioners afforded that in contemporary society? So the key thing I'll say is how we approach that is the Pewa Framework. Next slide. And then I after this and hand it over to Lala. This is how the office functions. That's less important. This will be on the slide deck, but just like we work at the intersect of communities of practice at the core, spaces of education, and spaces of research and innovation. And our outputs is like 21st century spaces of employment and the normalization of ancestral practices, innovation, and we track metrics of student graduation, the solvency of our community organizations, policy change, and so forth. Next slide. So this is the Pewa Framework, and I'll just say this. I think this is a really important framework thing to speak about because it underpins what our function is within the climate smart commodity ecosystem. So for those that aren't aware, Pewa, if you look at this ʻUmeke, this Hawaiian gourd, the Pewa is the butterfly-shaped wedge that was used to repair fractured spaces. And like, I'm a child of Taro farmers and child of activists, and they taught me don't use metaphors for things you've never done. So I made a Pewa. So in the process of entering into the university, I thought a lot about this, like by showing up to university, what do I bring and what is my function? And I thought about the Pewa because the Pewa is something that you use to heal a fractured space. The ʻUmeke, it was healing. The function of the ʻUmeke was to hold things of value. Yeah, and I think how do we heal the fractures of society that we're living in so that it can be worthy of holding these things we value again, our partnerships with our communities and the shared responsibility we have to be food sovereign as people. So what I learned from the Pewa, my dad had me make papakuiai, which is the board that you use for make kalo, and I was wildly unemployable when I was younger. And I never listened to him when I was making it. I was pounding really hard and there was a huge crack that came down the middle of the board, like right before I thought it was done. And I was so pissed. I was like, crap, that was my beer money for the week. So I ran and told my dad. And I said, Dad, can we fix this? And my dad, being my dad, slowed my roll a bit. He says, okay, stop. So there's three things you got to think about. The first thing you have to think about is like, you cannot rush. And that's the three things that came up from the metaphor of how to treat this work is equity, reciprocity, and transparency. So the first thing he asked me is like, well, before we fix it, you have to ask the question, who broke it? Because it's an important question. If it's broken because the wood is rotten, there's no point in trying to save this board. Throw them away and start again. But if it's broken, which I suspect it is because he wasn't listening and he was hammering on any kind and he cracked it, then you have the responsibility to understand and own the fact that you broke it. So from that lens, I think a lot about people want to rush to fix indigenous communities without stopping to understand, well, maybe they were never broken. And what's the history of which they broke? And more importantly, what is the thing that you're trying to fix? Take the time to understand the absolute, like the sciences and the technologies and the systems that once exist. So that's not the onus on community to have to explain it to you. That you understand yourself, you take that labor off of the community to the best of your ability, the thing that is being asked to be served, that's important. And to then understand the history of how it broke. There isn't an indigenous person I know that acquiesced to having their land and practices taken from them. Like we're smiling now, we're kind of got through it, but that was not something that any person, and indigenous is not a brown person, indigenous is the previous, like the lineal descendants of a landscape, the Irish, for example, super thrilled about the British colonization, right? Like those are histories that show up time and time again in humanity. So the first part of the Pewa is the willingness to understand the systems that were broken and like onus to understand its value, and also willingness to talk about the histories of how they got broken. So that's the equity to me. The reciprocity then, what I love about the Pewa is that it's butterfly shaped. It holds both sides together. And the reciprocity is important because when people say community, not everybody in a community is community, right? And I think when I say community, the question is, if you're going to take the time to understand these systems of like ancestral food systems and how it was done, how it was maintained, and history of fracture, the next level, well, who's still in the field holding on to these systems? Who are the people in the field holding on to these practices, invariably underfunded, and holding incredibly valuable knowledge precariously supported? through grant cycles, to like family going into debt to hold on to their practices. Because these are the people we need if we're going to repair, investing directly in them. How are we supporting them in their work, honoring what they're doing, and providing them, not barfing help on them, but doing deep listening to understand what they specifically need so that they can support and scale their project. But it's also holding them capable and also not denigrating yourself on the other side where you're providing resources at the university. It's like, we mean well, we want to support this and we have skill sets. So I love the Pewa, it holds both sides accountable. It allows that to be tight. And I really think that like that last part, the reciprocity is super important. I mean, the transparency is the final part. And the transparency is really critical because the transparency, like you do things in a transparent way. And that you, sorry, I'm gonna call for my son, I'm gonna meet him. That you take the time to talk about the work. You take the time to show how you're doing it. But the beautiful thing about the Pewa is when you look at the Pewa framework, it shows, when you look at the Pewa onto ʻUmeke, when I see it ʻUmeke that has a Pewa, I see that this is something that's meant to be passed down across generations. They're not hiding the fact that there is a fracture. It shows that both sides got together to fix it. And it's like the Japanese wabi-sabi. It makes things beautiful. It makes it like something that is of value. So I'm going to hand it over to Lala because I spoke a lot about that. But that is the thing of equity, reciprocity, and transparency that we're trying to figure out. Mahalo. And I'm going to jump off and jump back on. My son is calling. He's at daycare, so I'll be right back.
Mahalo, Kamuela. All right, you can pass it over to me. I think you have one more slide, but we'll keep going. One more, there we are. So how are we using the Pewa Framework within Hawaiʻi Climate-Smart Partnerships? We have set, this is a high-level framing for our 5-year project. And there's kind of two of the same within the equity work I've done and been a practitioner in. There's these framings around how to integrate equity into a project, an organization, a policy. And those 3 frameworks are normalize, organize, and operationalize. So too is Kamu gifted us with this practice around phased approach for the project. Kahua, Awamo, and Hukulu. So normalizing, or the Kahua foundation setting, really the project is focused on building a shared understanding of the current landscape and foundations of trust or lack of trust with agricultural producers and practitioners and the communities they're part of. What this does is help create a container and laying a foundation, really centering in equity through relationship building at the foundation of it. And initially, a lot of it was internal relationship building. You know, we mentioned the broad spectrum of network folks. For the most part, it's the first time we're working with each other. So the building of relationships was really critical internally to sense make in order for us to be able to navigate cohesively together and sense making those root causes that Kamu spoke of. This also is helping to cultivate shared agreements and understanding using explicit language and practice grounded in context and relationality. And ideally within our organizational culture, it's normalizing conversations and deepening understanding about socioeconomic, ecological justice and liberation from a US and more importantly from a Hawaii specific perspective. And this is done within typically over the past 1.5 years, and we're still doing it in that Kahua phase. This next phase, Awamo, Awamo refers to a tool that is used to distribute weight evenly, if you've seen that before on a stick. And really, well, therefore, it's focusing on the distribution of resources after the relationships and capacities have been developed. And this is where the immense amount of abundance of productivity our Hui has been a part of in creating tools and metrics and data and benchmarking through the programs, specific projects within the project, like our portfolio of research and really looking at policy, both internally within our governance structure, but the broader system we're a part of, and we're starting to consider broader policy initiatives. And this helps with establishing clear and explicit equity-centered processes and goals that are demonstrated through the organization and implementation. If folks, there's probably a spectrum of folks that are oriented to equity and the work involved there. One kind of standard is 5 dimensions of equity. There's procedural, structural, distributional, intergenerational, and cultural, which was a 5th one that's recently been brought on by the greater, I guess you could say equity sector or practitioners in that space. This last phase, the kukulu or promotion, literally means building and focusing on enduring the relationships, the partnerships, and the project, as Susan mentioned, past the 5 years. And this consists a lot on ongoing relationship and trust building, really robust implementation, consistent iterative observation, tracking, experimentation, assessment, and resourcing, evolving really our competencies and investment ideally will allow for transformative justice, access, agility, inclusivity, economic effectiveness, and socio-ecological health and well-being to be cohesively appropriate to place and people here in Hawaii. The next slide. So Susan put up that ecosystem of circles that our project has emerged from, literally. And this circle here, we're dialing into the project's equity and indigenous innovation. A really critical component of the project is having, again, that shared understanding and contextual and historical analysis, a critique of the systems this project is a part of, as Susan mentioned earlier. Really considering those root causes of the systemic fractures within the agricultural sector here in Hawaii and how it's connected to the broader system in order to support, create, and actuate really root remedies. We don't want band-aids. We really want to get to the core of where the fractures began in order to be able to create mechanisms for mending, as our Pewa describes in its ethos. And as the project is underway, we're deepening our orientation to the nexus of social and ecological justice, and really looking at our greater aspiration in being intentionally designed to prioritize and advocate for historically underserved communities, producers, and practitioners, while considering ways to transform historically underserving institutions. So again, that reciprocity of holding both sides equally in consideration. You can go on to the next slide. Some specific examples, and we're dialing into systems and institutions. So what are underserving institutions look like for Hawaii producers and practitioners? And these are a few fractures we've identified thus far. Those may be familiar with NRCS, PIA, CPS, really are based on continental Western agricultural understanding, which is incompatible with Hawaii agriculture practices and producer realities. There is a major lack of recognition of indigenous agricultural practices, and a multitude of barriers for underserved producers in general, but specifically Hawaii producers seeking NRCS or USDA financial or technical support. An example for perspective, Hawaii producers have the highest overhead in the nation, reaching 40%, right? I may be talking to the choir here, but just to like reaffirm the uniqueness of Hawaii producers and its importance to really understand context. There is a major lack of research and data to better understand the identities, challenges, needs, and capacities of our local producers, though that work is starting to emerge. And I really want to lift up an invaluable body of work by a dear friend and former colleague within our project. Some folks may know her, Destiny Apalado. And she did a capstone report for her Master's of Environmental Management at UH this past year, titled Place-Based Equity for Hawaii Local Producers. And this research leveraged the community's knowledge by conducting talk story interviews with 17 local producer supporting organizations and 73 local producers, really to investigate the demographics of underinvested producers, what resources are in demand, and what barriers to federal resources producers are experiencing. And this paper is available for viewing, and we can also send you that link if interested, if you're not familiar with it yet. But a local knowledge reaffirmed that agriculture service providers and producers suggested the most underinvested farmers and ranchers are Native Hawaiian, immigrant, and illiterate producers here in Hawaii. And the next slide here. So shifting underserving institutions. As was mentioned earlier, since the founding of USDA, there have been exclusionary practices and policies which have disproportionately impacted minority groups. And from a place-based context, the plantation era in Hawaii is the epitome of this legacy. In recent years, these institutions have made equity a priority, evident in the creation of USDA's Equity Commission, their Equity Action Plan, and the creation of NRCS's Equity Division. And USDA, their Equity Commission just released a final report about a month ago, which actually mentions Hawaii twice. And I have links to both the Equity Action Plan and the final report that the Commission recently produced. I'm happy to share that. And we can keep going. Actually, real quick, the two major strategies that USDA has presented in their Equity Action Plan that our project is prioritizing is ensuring agricultural resources and assistance are broadly accessible while creating more, more and better market opportunities to USDA policies and programs that advance agriculture. And ensuring equitable access for forest resources. And the last one, removing barriers to access USDA programs and incorporating indigenous values and perspectives in programs design and delivery. All right. And then this is how we are actuating it within the project. So equity in form and practice. These items are what we have been internally as well as starting to externally consider. I won't go into detail for time's sake, but I'll do a brief project equity assessment. This is another tool that's used within equity work for project and organization. And this assessment helps individuals and the collective understand their readiness and capacity to engage in place-based equity work, to be able to deliver on key components for our goals and outcomes. And the assessment was meant to establish an internal kind of eco-social, biocultural foundation setting to understand our own positionality as individuals, therefore collectively as a hui. A lot of data gathering, sense making, and then sharing out, even to, demographic. What are our demographics? We're part of the project in general. The Equity Foundation's professional development workshop is one that I've been conducting for many years, whether it was with city and county, private entities, philanthropy, and now had an opportunity to work with the Climate-Smart project, and about 24 of us within the project went on a rigorous 5-week, 2-hour session, professional development to kind of set foundation around equity, pre-reading, watching, listening material, activities within our sessions, discussions around sensitive and uncomfortable topics that I think deepened our understanding to ourselves, each other, and the work. We're working on an engagement guide as well. And we're pulling from a lot of inspiration that's already there. I want to lift up the Kulana Noi'i framework, if folks are familiar with that, that talks about place-based engagement for researchers. There's the climate the Honolulu Office of Climate Change Equity Engagement Guide that's considered Kako'iwi's research protocols, Waipaw research guidelines, Waimanalo Pona Research Hui, Food Systems, Racial Equity Assessment Tools, and Malama Ikekai Community Action Guide. There's a lot of tools already being developed that we are gleaning from and using as guidance for our own guide. Sociocracy is mentioned, data policy, we're considering our fair care, indigenous data, sovereignty principles in writing for our internal governance structures. Producer and Practitioner Advisory Council, as Susan has mentioned, we're about to stand that up at the end of the month or the beginning of November as a kind of a grounded voice to guide the work ahead that isn't hired within the project, that are frontline producers and practitioners, that are Aina-based individuals that have their nails and hands a bit dirtier than us in the offices to really guide phase 2, where we're prioritizing underserved producers. We are also doing advocacy work and really looking to be good allies within the project for our producers, whether that's formal grievances to USDA on delays that we've experienced, the challenges with getting procurement and official contracts signed for our producers that have been waiting for a year and a half, that have plants that are growing out of their pots and our 4 seasons don't align with grant cycles, so to speak. So there's a lot of that back and forth internally that's being done, and looking at that systems change and our positionality in that. And then finally, evaluation. This is something we opted to do. It wasn't necessary, but we are going to be doing a rigorous internal evaluation of the project based on equity and place-based understanding at the end of this, to see who are we accountable to, and how are we benefiting what we said we were going to do at the beginning of the project. So I'll stop there. Yeah. Mahalo.